The words hit me like a slap across the face, delivered with the same casual tone he'd used to ask me to pass the salt. "We don't have room for you anymore. Mom, you need to go." I stood there in the kitchen I'd helped choose, wearing the apron I'd bought to make his favorite meals, and felt my world crumble. But here's what my son Ernest didn't know. By morning, he'd lose everything, because I owned half of that house he was so eager to kick me out of. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 3 months earlier, I'd walked through Ernest's front door carrying nothing but 2 battered suitcases, a hand-stitched quilt from my old bedroom, and a silver-frame photograph of my late husband, John, the day I'd handed my only son that check for $180,000, every penny from John's life insurance policy. I didn't hesitate for even a moment. "This is your future, sweetheart," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "This is our family's security." Ernest had just married his college sweetheart, Sienna, and they were desperately trying to buy a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in one of Charlotte's nicest suburbs. When the bank had turned them down for the full mortgage amount, I'd stepped in without a second thought. Sienna had thrown her arms around me like something out of a Hallmark movie, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered, "We'll never forget this kindness. Athena, you'll always have a home with us. Always." Ernest had kissed my forehead tenderly and promised I'd never have to worry about anything again. The house was everything I'd dreamed of for my son, modern, spacious, filled with natural light. White walls stretched up to vaulted ceilings. Polished gray floors gleamed like mirrors, and the kitchen looked like something from those home improvement shows I used to watch with John. My room was downstairs in what they called the guest suite. No walk-in closet, just a narrow twin bed and a half bathroom without a shower. But I didn't complain, not once. After 2 years of rattling around in my empty house since John passed, hearing young voices and laughter in the morning felt like a gift from heaven. Those first few weeks felt like a beautiful dream. Ernest would bring me coffee in my favorite mug every morning, the one with tiny roses that John had given me on our 25th anniversary, and we'd sit together watching the sunrise through the kitchen window. Sienna would show me how to work their fancy Wi-Fi thermostat, though I noticed her sighing with impatience whenever I needed help remembering the steps. We even shared dinner together once, all 3 of us, around their gorgeous mahogany dining table, talking about their plans for the future and their dreams of filling those empty bedrooms with children's laughter. But somewhere around the 2nd week, things began to shift in ways that made my grandmother's intuition start tingling. I started catching fragments of conversations that made my stomach twist into painful knots. Sienna joking on the phone with her sorority sisters about living with 2 kids and a grandmother. Ernest groaning audibly when I asked if I could install a small shelf in the laundry room for my detergent and fabric softener. The changes started small, so small I told myself I was just being overly sensitive, maybe even paranoid in my old age. The upstairs refrigerator suddenly had a shiny new padlock on it one Tuesday morning. When I asked about it over breakfast, Sienna explained with a tight smile that she was meal prepping for her new fitness routine and needed to keep everything perfectly organized. Ernest moved the internet router to his upstairs office without warning, and mysteriously, my Netflix account stopped working for 3 whole days. When I mentioned it, he claimed there were technical issues with the service provider and promised to look into it when he had time. One evening, I overheard Sienna on the phone in the kitchen while I was folding laundry in the adjoining room. Her voice carried more clearly than she realized. "She's sweet enough, don't get me wrong, but we really need our own space. You know, This whole situation just isn't sustainable long term. We're newlyweds, for crying out loud. We need privacy to build our marriage. I kept my mouth shut and my heart heavy, swallowing the hurt like bitter medicine. I continued cooking their favorite meals, Ernest's beloved pot roast every Sunday, Sienna's requested salmon with dill sauce on Wednesdays. I folded their towels with the same care I'd used when Ernest was little, wiped down their granite counters without being asked, and tried to make myself as invisible as possible. I gave them all the space I could manage, spending most of my time in my cramped little room reading romance novels or taking long walks around their manicured neighborhood, admiring the other families' flower gardens and wondering if I'd ever feel welcome anywhere again. I even smiled and nodded enthusiastically when Sienna mentioned, with barely contained excitement, how they were thinking of converting the downstairs den into a nursery someday soon. The room right next to mine, the only common space where I felt comfortable watching my evening programs. But I pushed down my disappointment and told her how wonderful that would be, how lucky any grandchild would be to grow up in such a beautiful home. But then came the morning that changed everything forever. I was padding toward the kitchen in my worn terry cloth slippers, looking forward to my usual cup of Earl Grey tea and maybe catching the morning news, when I heard Ernest's voice drifting around the corner. His words stopped me cold, rooting me to the spot like I'd been struck by lightning. She's not going to leave if we keep being nice to her. We've got to push her out somehow, but without causing a big scene that makes us look bad. Sienna's response was even sharper, more calculated than I'd ever heard her sound. She won't sign over her share of the house unless she feels completely unwanted. We need to make things uncomfortable enough that she'll leave on her own. Then we can finally have the life we planned before she moved in. I stood there frozen in the hallway, one hand pressed against the expensive floral wallpaper I'd helped them choose just 6 days earlier, feeling like someone had poured ice water directly into my veins. My son, my only child, the baby I'd rocked through countless sleepless nights when he had colic, the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, was actively plotting to force me out of the home I'd helped them buy. All so they could have more space, more convenience, more freedom from the burden of caring for their aging mother. The betrayal cut deeper than John's death had. At least when I lost my husband, it was to cancer, an enemy we could name and fight together. This felt like being stabbed in the back by the person I trusted most in the world. That evening, with my heart breaking, but my hands steady, I made Ernest's absolute favorite dinner, chicken Alfredo with extra Parmesan and garlic bread, just the way he'd loved it since he was 12 years old and going through his picky eater phase. Neither of them came to the table when I called. Sienna claimed she'd already eaten with a friend, and Ernest mumbled something about having too much work to do before disappearing upstairs with his laptop and a protein bar. I sat alone at that beautiful dining table, eating slowly and methodically, while my mind wandered back through 32 years of devoted motherhood. Soccer games where I'd cheered until my voice was hoarse, even in the pouring rain. Midnight trips to the emergency room when he'd broken his wrist falling off his bike. Me holding his hand while the doctor set the bone. The expensive SAT tutor I'd scraped together money to hire, working double shifts at the hospital to afford it. Every single birthday card he'd ever made me with his own little hands, carefully tucked away in a shoebox I still carried in my suitcase like precious treasure. And now, somehow, I'd become nothing more than an obstacle to overcome, a problem to be solved, a burden to be quietly eliminated from their perfect life. The next morning arrived with a crispness that seemed to mirror the coldness I felt settling in my chest. I was standing at the kitchen sink, gently washing fresh strawberries for breakfast, when Sienna walked in with her arms folded across her chest and that carefully blank expression she wore when she was about to deliver bad news. The morning light streaming through the window caught the highlights in her perfectly styled hair, and for a moment, she looked like the sweet girl who had hugged me so tightly just 3 months ago. "Athena," she said, her voice steady but distant. "We think it's time you looked for something more permanent. You know, just your own space, for your comfort." The words hung in the air like smoke, and I felt my hands still under the cool running water. She was trying to sound caring, considerate even, but I could hear the rehearsed quality beneath her tone. I continued washing the strawberries, one by one, watching the water run red as the juice mixed with the stream. "Something more permanent," I repeated quietly, not looking up from my task. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd given them the means to buy this house, helped make their dream of permanence possible, and now I was being told I had no permanent place in it. Ernest entered the kitchen a moment later, already dressed for work, sipping his coffee from the travel mug I'd bought him for his birthday. He avoided my eyes as he moved through his morning routine, checking his phone, grabbing his keys from the hook by the back door. The casual way he acted, as if this conversation was just another item on his daily to-do list, made my heart ache even more. "We don't have space for you anymore, Mom," he said finally, his voice matter of fact. "You need to go." The words were delivered with such startling casualness that for a moment I wondered if I'd misheard him. This was my son, the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared, who had sobbed when I dropped him off for his first day of kindergarten. I turned off the water slowly, dried my hands on the dish towel that hung beside the sink, the one with little chickens on it that I'd picked out at a country store during one of our family trips years ago. I turned to face them both, these two people who had become strangers wearing familiar faces. And I felt something shift inside me, not anger, exactly, something quieter but infinitely more powerful. "Okay," I said simply, my voice steady as granite. "I'll be out by tonight." Sienna blinked, clearly caught off guard by my calm acceptance. I think she'd been prepared for tears, for pleading, maybe even for a fight. Ernest nodded like he'd just completed a mundane work task, already mentally moving on to the next item on his agenda. "Thanks, Mom," he said, turning away as if the matter was settled. But as I walked to my small room to pack my belongings, my fingers found the corner of something I'd kept hidden at the bottom of my largest suitcase throughout these 3 months of hoping things would work out. The red folder. Inside it lay the house deed, crisp and official, with my name printed clearly next to Ernest's as a 49% co-owner. All those years of working as a registered nurse, saving every penny I could, had taught me the importance of keeping careful records. I'd insisted on being added to the deed when I provided the down payment, not out of distrust, but out of the practical wisdom that comes with age and experience. I packed methodically, folding each piece of clothing with the same care I'd used when packing Ernest's summer camp trunk all those years ago. John's photograph went into its protective sleeve, nestled between my sweaters. The paperback romance novel I'd been reading, a story about second chances and new beginnings, found its place among my few personal items. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me, like the quiet that comes before a storm. I didn't say goodbye. There seemed no point in empty words when their actions had spoken so clearly. I called a taxi from my cell phone, standing in the driveway with my 2 suitcases while the house loomed behind me, beautiful and cold in the afternoon sunlight. The driver, a kind older gentleman named Frank, helped me load my bags and asked if I was sure I had everything. I looked back at the house one final time, at the windows I'd helped wash, the garden I'd tended, the porch where I'd imagined sitting with future grandchildren, and nodded. Yes, I told Frank. I have everything I need. As we drove away, I clutched that red folder in my lap like a lifeline. What Ernest and Sienna didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined in their eagerness to reclaim their space, was that their dream house was about to become their nightmare. You see, 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a certified letter from Carolina Private Lending that Ernest had never mentioned. My name was on the deed, which meant I was legally entitled to be notified of any liens or encumbrances against the property. Ernest had taken out a $95,000 business loan, using the house as collateral for some marketing startup venture he'd never bothered to discuss with me. According to the letter, payments hadn't been made in 4 months, and the lender was preparing to begin foreclosure proceedings. As a co-owner, I had the right to either remedy the default or release my claim to the property. The extended stay motel I'd booked a week earlier, acting on an instinct I couldn't quite name at the time, was clean but heartbreakingly impersonal. Faded carpet, a lamp that flickered when touched, the lingering smell of industrial cleaning products trying to mask decades of other people's stories. I paid cash for a week and politely declined housekeeping services. I didn't want anyone seeing how little I had, how far I'd fallen from the comfortable life I'd built with John. That first night, I lay on the stiff mattress with the television muted, staring at the water-stained ceiling while holding the deed against my chest like armor. I wasn't angry. Anger would have been too simple, too clean. I was something deeper and more complex. I was done. Done being taken for granted. Done being treated like an inconvenience. Done pretending that love alone could excuse the kind of calculated cruelty I'd witnessed. The next morning, I walked to the motel's business center and used their printer to make copies of everything. The deed, the foreclosure notice, the bank statements showing my $180,000 transfer. I was methodical, thorough, the way John had taught me to be when handling important paperwork. Always keep records. Athena, he used to say. Paper doesn't lie, and it doesn't forget. I was halfway through my second cup of convenience store coffee when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. Mrs. Carter. The voice was professional, courteous. My name is Brad Wilson. I'm with Carolina Private Lending. You're listed as a co-owner of a property at 124 Grayson Park Drive. My heart began to beat faster, but my voice remained steady. Yes, that's correct. Is there a problem? Brad cleared his throat delicately. I'm afraid there's been a default on a business loan secured by that property. Your son, Mr. Ernest Carter, took out a loan for $95,000. No payments have been made in 4 months, and we've issued multiple warnings. Unless the loan is brought current immediately, we'll be forced to begin foreclosure proceedings this Friday. The irony was almost poetic. Ernest had been so eager to push me out to make room for his future, but he'd mortgaged that very future without telling me, without considering the consequences, without remembering that I owned nearly half of everything he was gambling away. I see, I said calmly. What are my options as a co-owner? Brad explained that I could either pay off the loan in full, work out a payment plan, or release my ownership claim and allow the foreclosure to proceed. He would email me all the necessary paperwork within the hour. I thanked him politely and hung up. Then I sat very still in that shabby motel room, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic, and I made my decision. When the email arrived, I printed out every page. I read through each document carefully, twice, making sure I understood exactly what I was signing. Then I took out the same blue pen I'd used to sign Ernest's permission slips for school field trips, the pen that had signed his graduation cards and birthday checks, and I wrote my name slowly and deliberately on every required line. I was releasing my claim to the house. I was letting it go. But more than that, I was letting them learn what it felt like to lose everything without warning, the same way they had made me feel disposable without a moment's notice. I scanned the documents and sent them back to Brad within 2 hours. He called to confirm receipt, his voice carrying a note of surprise that I'd moved so quickly. "The foreclosure will proceed as scheduled," he informed me. "Thank you for handling this so promptly, Mrs. Carter." I thanked him and hung up. Then I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of the wine I'd bought at the corner store, and sat in the quiet of my small room, finally free from the weight of trying to make people love me who had already decided I was expendable. Ernest was about to learn a lesson I should have taught him years ago. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences arrive with the devastating swiftness of perfect justice. I didn't tell anyone what I had done. I didn't call my sister Ruth in Portland, didn't post anything on Facebook, didn't even whisper a word to the church ladies' circle that had been my support system since John's funeral. I simply sat in that modest motel room and embraced the profound silence I had been denied for months. No footsteps pounding overhead, no muffled arguments through thin walls, no passive-aggressive comments disguised as casual conversation. Just blessed, healing quiet. The foreclosure notice arrived faster than even I had anticipated, less than 48 hours after I'd sent those signed documents back to Brad Wilson. The sheriff's office taped a bright orange notice to the front door of 124 Grayson Park Drive. I didn't witness it myself. I had no desire to watch my former home transform into a crime scene of broken dreams, but I didn't need to see it to know exactly what was happening. Sienna, in her predictable fashion, immediately took to social media like a woman possessed. I found myself morbidly curious about their reaction, so I created a fake Facebook account, something I never thought I'd stoop to at my age, and searched for their neighborhood group. There it was, Sienna's frantic post pinned at the top. "Urgent, our home is being targeted by foreclosure scammers. Please share any resources for attorneys who handle these kinds of fraudulent cases." The irony made me laugh out loud for the first time in weeks. I sat there in my little motel room, drinking coffee from a paper cup and scrolling through her public meltdown with something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't far from it. The comments section filled up quickly with concerned neighbors, old college friends, even Ernest's former coworkers from his corporate job. "What happened? Can we help? I thought you guys were doing so well financially." Sienna responded to each comment like a desperate politician facing scandal, never quite answering directly, just spinning everything into vague tales of hardship and betrayal. "We're being backstabbed by someone who should have protected us," she wrote in one particularly dramatic response. "Someone who was supposed to care about our family's future." That was when the narrative shifted from comedy to something much darker and more manipulative. Within hours, I started receiving text messages from people I hadn't spoken to in months, sometimes years. My cousin Sarah from Atlanta, Mrs. Henderson from church, even John's sister Patricia, who lived up in Virginia. All of them asking variations of the same confused question. Athena, what on earth is going on down there? Sienna had crafted her story carefully, painting herself and Ernest as innocent victims of some elaborate betrayal orchestrated by a bitter, unstable older woman. She never mentioned the $180,000 I had given them, never spoke about the months of increasingly cruel treatment, never acknowledged the secret business loan that Ernest had taken out behind my back. She simply positioned herself as a young mother-to-be whose dreams were being destroyed by someone who should have loved and protected her family. Ernest, showing the same lack of backbone that had characterized his recent behavior, doubled down on his wife's victim narrative. He posted an old photograph of the two of us from when he was about 8 years old. We were at a county fair, sharing cotton candy and laughing at something silly, and captioned it with words that cut deeper than any knife. It's heartbreaking when the people who raised you decide to turn against everything you've worked for. Some wounds never heal. He didn't tag me, didn't mention my name, but he didn't need to. Everyone who knew our family would understand exactly who he was talking about. It was pure emotional manipulation, designed to make people fill in the blanks with their own assumptions about bitter old women and ungrateful behavior. I was being erased from my own story, transformed into the villain of a narrative I'd never agreed to participate in. For several days, I seriously considered defending myself. I thought about posting the deed, sharing the bank statements that showed my $180,000 contribution, screenshotting the foreclosure documents that revealed Ernest's secret borrowing. I had all the evidence I needed to demolish their carefully constructed lie, to show the world exactly who the real victims were in this situation. But then I remembered something my father used to tell me when I was a young woman dealing with workplace drama. Never wrestle with pigs. Athena, you'll both get covered in mud, but the pig will enjoy it. So I stayed silent, even as the pressure mounted and the whispers grew louder. The breaking point came when Officer James Reeves from the Sheriff's Department called me directly. His voice was kind but official, the tone of a man who'd had to make many similar calls over the years. Mrs. Carter, he said, this is just a courtesy notification. There will be a formal lockout scheduled at the Grayson Park address this Friday morning at 10 o'clock. Since you've already signed the release documents, you're not required to be present, but we wanted to notify you as a former listed party on the deed. I thanked him politely, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Will they have time to remove their belongings? They've been given proper notice, ma'am. Standard procedure allows for personal property removal before the lockout occurs. After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time, trying to process what I was feeling. It wasn't the sweet taste of revenge I might have expected. Instead, it was something more complex, a mixture of sadness, relief, and the profound exhaustion that comes after a long, difficult battle finally ends. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched my somber mood perfectly. I didn't drive by the house. I didn't position myself where I could watch the proceedings. Instead, I stayed in my motel room, made instant oatmeal in the microwave, and waited for the inevitable phone call. It came at 10:47 a.m., just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. The caller ID showed unknown, but I knew who it would be before I answered. Ernest's voice came through the speaker, low and shaking with barely controlled fury. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but we're out, evicted, gone. You've destroyed everything we worked for. Mom, I hope you can live with yourself." The line went dead before I could respond. Not that I had any words prepared. What could I possibly say that I was sorry for refusing to be their doormat, that I regretted protecting myself from people who had made it clear I was unwanted, that I wished I could take back the lesson they so desperately needed to learn? 20 minutes later. Sienna sent a text message that was longer and even more venomous. "Athena, if your goal was to hurt us, congratulations. We're homeless now, and I'm pregnant. I hope you sleep peacefully tonight, knowing you've destroyed your own family. Some people never learn that love is supposed to be unconditional." That word, unconditional, clung to me for the rest of the day like a burr, as if their treatment of me had been loving, as if I had no right to set boundaries with people who had used me like a stepping stone to their dreams, as if wanting basic respect and kindness from my own son was somehow selfish or unreasonable. I turned off my phone after that, walked to the corner store, and bought a simple spiral notebook with a blue cover. Back in my room, I opened it to the first page and wrote in careful script, "Today, they lost everything they took for granted." Then I turned the page and kept writing, pouring out months of hurt and frustration and quiet determination onto those lined pages. I wrote about the morning Ernest was born, how I'd held him in my arms and promised to always protect him. I wrote about teaching him to ride a bicycle, staying up all night when he had the flu, working double shifts to pay for his college textbooks. I wrote about John's funeral, how Ernest had held my hand and promised I'd never be alone. And then I wrote about the last 3 months, the locked refrigerator, the disconnected internet, the overheard conversations about pushing me out. I wrote about Sienna's fake smiles and Ernest's averted eyes. I wrote about feeling invisible in a house I'd helped them buy, unwanted in a family I'd sacrificed everything to support. By the time I finished writing, the sun was setting outside my small window, painting the parking lot in shades of gold and amber. I felt lighter somehow, as if transferring those experiences from my heart to paper had freed up space for something new to grow. I closed the notebook and placed it on the nightstand next to John's photograph. Tomorrow, I decided I would start looking forward instead of backward. Tonight, though, I would simply sit in the quiet and let myself grieve, not for the house they'd lost, but for the relationship we'd all destroyed through selfishness, manipulation, and the toxic belief that family obligations should never have limits. They had taught me that love without respect is just another form of abuse. Now it was time for me to teach myself what it meant to choose my own peace over their expectations. They didn't stay quiet for long. 2 days after the lockout, while I was sitting in my motel room trying to lose myself in a paperback mystery novel, Sienna launched what could only be described as a full-scale social media campaign. She posted a carefully curated Instagram story, 10 slides with pastel backgrounds and cursive text overlays, titled, "When Family Betrays You, a Heartbreaking Truth." Each frame told a meticulously crafted version of our story, one that bore only a passing resemblance to reality. According to Sienna's narrative, she and Ernest had graciously opened their home to a grieving elderly relative, only to be blindsided by legal manipulation and financial sabotage. She painted herself as a vulnerable pregnant woman whose dreams of security had been shattered by someone who should have protected her family's future. The most devastating slide showed a photograph of their empty living room, boxes scattered across the hardwood floors I'd helped them choose, with text that read, "Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest." This is what elder abuse looks like when someone uses legal loopholes to steal your home. Elder abuse. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. She was accusing me of abusing them, when I was the one who had been systematically degraded and pushed out of their lives. The audacity was breathtaking, but I had to admit it was also brilliant. Who would question a young pregnant woman's account of being victimized by her bitter mother-in-law? The comments section exploded with sympathy and outrage. Dozens of strangers who knew nothing about our actual situation piled on with their own horror stories and righteous anger. "Some people just can't stand to see their adult children happy," wrote one woman. "This is exactly why we need stronger elder accountability laws," added another. "You're so brave for sharing this." Sienna, sending prayers and love during this difficult time. I kept scrolling, my stomach churning with each new comment, until I found Ernest's response buried in the thread. "You handled this with such grace, sweetheart. You protected our future the only way you could." She made her choice when she decided destruction was more important than family. I stared at those words for a long time, reading them over and over until they blurred together. This was my son, the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, now publicly declaring that I had chosen destruction over family. The irony was staggering. He was the one who had destroyed our family the moment he decided I was disposable. But Sienna wasn't finished. Over the next few days, her campaign intensified. She posted TikTok videos of herself packing boxes while crying, her growing belly prominently displayed, holding cardboard signs with messages like "evicted by family" and "homeless because of greed." One video, filmed in front of a U-Haul truck with mascara streaming down her cheeks, garnered over 80,000 views in just 2 days. The comments on that video were particularly brutal. People were tagging local news stations, offering to start GoFundMe campaigns, sharing their own stories of family betrayal. One woman wrote, "This is why I could never live with my in-laws. Some people think owning property gives them the right to control everyone's lives. I found myself creating additional fake social media accounts just to monitor the spread of their narrative. It was like watching a wildfire consume everything in its path: the truth, my reputation, any chance of reconciliation. Every share, every sympathetic comment, every outraged emoji reaction felt like another nail in the coffin of my dignity." The situation reached a breaking point when my old church pastor, Reverend Williams, sent me a text message that made my blood run cold. "Athena, I'm seeing some very concerning posts online about you and Ernest. Can we talk? I'm worried about what people are saying." That was my limit. I could tolerate being painted as the villain by Ernest and Sienna, but I wouldn't let them destroy my standing in the community I'd called home for over 30 years. These were people who had known me since Ernest was in diapers, who had supported me through John's illness and death, who had watched me sacrifice everything for my family's happiness. I spent the next hour gathering every piece of documentation I had: the original deed showing my 49% ownership of the house, the bank statement clearly displaying my $180,000 wire transfer to help with their down payment, the email from Carolina Private Lending detailing Ernest's secret $95,000 business loan and subsequent default, screenshots of Sienna's text messages, including the particularly damning one where she'd written, "Once she's gone, we can finally turn that downstairs area into the perfect nursery." I didn't add commentary or explanations. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves with a clarity that no amount of social media manipulation could obscure. I sent everything to Reverend Williams, then forwarded the same package to my cousin Sarah, to the church ladies group chat, and to several other family friends who had reached out with concerns. The response was swift and decisive. Within minutes, my niece Rebecca replied to the group chat, "Oh my God, Aunt Athena. So she's been lying to everyone this whole time." Then came a flood of supportive messages, apologies for doubting me, and expressions of outrage at how I'd been treated. But the most satisfying response came from Mrs. Henderson, the church organist who had known our family for decades. She sent me a private message that read, "Honey, I've been watching that girl's little performance online, and something didn't smell right. A mother doesn't just turn on her child without cause. I'm sorry we doubted you, and I'm proud of you for protecting yourself." The shift in public opinion was almost instantaneous. People began sharing the real story, the documented truth that Sienna had worked so hard to bury under her victim narrative. Comments started appearing on her posts, questioning her version of events, asking about the money I'd provided, pointing out inconsistencies in her timeline. Sienna tried to fight back, posting angry responses about fake documents and lies spread by bitter people, but the damage was done. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. That evening, as I sat in my motel room, reading the supportive messages from people who actually knew me, my phone buzzed with a new text from Ernest. No caller ID tricks this time, just his name on my screen, and a message that was notably different in tone from his previous communications. "Please call me. Just talk to me." 10 minutes later, another message. "I know things got bad, but you're still my mom." I stared at those words for a long time, feeling the familiar tug of maternal instinct warring with the hard-earned wisdom of self-preservation. He was still my son, yes, the child I'd loved and raised and sacrificed for, but he was also the man who had systematically pushed me out of his life, who had publicly branded me as an abuser, who had come to my motel room with legal documents designed to give him access to my retirement funds. I could feel myself wavering, that old familiar urge to forgive and forget, to smooth things over and pretend the last few months had never happened. But then I looked at John's photograph on my nightstand, and I could almost hear his voice reminding me of something he used to say, "Athena, you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm." I picked up my phone, looked at Ernest's messages one more time, then powered it off and slid it into the drawer of the nightstand. Some bridges don't burn all at once in dramatic explosions. Some crumble slowly, piece by piece. Every time someone you love decides that your dignity is expendable, that your feelings don't matter, that your very existence is negotiable. I lay down on the motel bed and whispered into the silence, "Still your mom, but not your fool anymore." For the first time in months, I slept 8 hours without waking up once. When morning came, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time, peace. Not the fragile, temporary peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the deep, lasting peace that comes from finally choosing yourself over people who have repeatedly chosen to hurt you. Ernest and Sienna had taught me that public opinion could be manipulated, that social media could turn fiction into accepted truth, and that even family members would sacrifice your reputation to protect their own interests. But they had also taught me something far more valuable, that my worth wasn't determined by their treatment of me, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. The truth had set me free, but more importantly, I had finally set myself free. It started with a bouquet of white lilies, the kind Ernest used to bring me from the grocery store when he was 16, trying to apologize for denting my car or failing a chemistry test. They appeared outside my motel door in a cheap glass vase with a handwritten note, "Let's talk, please." No signature, but I knew those careful letters anywhere. I didn't touch them. I left those flowers sitting there overnight, and by morning they had begun to wilt at the edges, their pristine white petals browning like old photographs. When the front desk clerk asked if I wanted them thrown away, I nodded without hesitation. That afternoon, Ernest showed up in person. I heard his familiar knock, 3 soft taps, then 2 more, and found myself staring at him through the peephole. He looked exhausted, older somehow, like a man who hadn't been sleeping well, against every instinct screaming at me to keep that door locked. I opened it just a crack. 5 minutes, I said. We sat across from each other at the small round table by the window, and I watched him struggle to find the right version of himself to present. Finally, he settled on contrite and vulnerable. "I messed up, Mom," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should have told you about the loan. I shouldn't have let Sienna treat you that way. I panicked when she got pregnant. We were scared." I said nothing, just waited for him to continue, to show me who he really was beneath this carefully crafted apology. "I didn't come here to argue," he said, pulling out a manila folder. "I was hoping you might be willing to sign something small, just to help us negotiate with the lender and get back on our feet." The moment I read those legal documents, a disguised power of attorney that would have given him access to my retirement accounts, I knew nothing had changed. He hadn't come seeking forgiveness or reconciliation. He had come because he still saw me as a resource to be exploited when times got desperate. "Get out," I said quietly. 3 days later, I walked into the housing board office and handed my card to Doreen, the kind woman who had offered to help weeks earlier. "I want to move on," I told her, "not just from them, but from all of it." She smiled like she'd been expecting me and slid a folder across her desk labeled "Senior Housing, Coastal Options." On the first page was a 2-bedroom condo near Wilmington, complete with a small porch and ocean access, priced within my pension budget. "This one," I said, circling it with her pen. That evening, I received one final email from Sienna. "I don't know what we're supposed to do now. We have nothing left. I know you hate me, but please think of the baby." I closed my laptop without responding. Tomorrow, I would start my new life by the sea, where the sound of waves would drown out the echoes of disappointment and betrayal. Tonight, I would simply sit in the quiet I had fought so hard to claim. Dear friends, Athena's story teaches us something profound that many of us learn too late in life. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's self-destruction disguised as sacrifice. For decades, we're taught that family comes first, that good parents give everything for their children, that unconditional love means accepting any treatment because blood is thicker than water. But here's the truth, that society doesn't want to admit. Some people will take your kindness for weakness, your generosity for foolishness, and your love for granted until there's nothing left of you. Athena gave her son $180,000, her entire safety net, her late husband's final gift to her, without hesitation. She opened her heart and her home, only to be treated like an unwanted burden. The saddest part, she almost let them convince her that she was the problem. Real love requires respect. Real family supports each other through difficulties instead of discarding inconvenient members. Real relationships are built on mutual care, not one-sided sacrifice. If you're in a situation where you're constantly giving but never receiving, where your feelings don't matter but everyone else's do, where you're made to feel guilty for having basic human needs, it's time to choose yourself. You're not selfish for wanting dignity. You're not cruel for setting boundaries. You're not wrong for refusing to be someone's doormat. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away and let people learn to value what they've lost. Sometimes peace is more important than family approval. Sometimes saving yourself is the only option left. What would you have done in Athena's shoes? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping your dignity? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell if these stories resonate with you. Every week, we share real tales of courage, resilience, and the power of choosing yourself. You're not alone in your struggles, and your voice matters here.